Murmurs are differentiated from heart sounds by their longer duration. If you detect a heart murmur, you must learn to assess its timing, shape, location of maximal intensity, and radiation, grade its intensity, and assess its pitch and quality. Palpating the carotid pulse as you listen can help you with timing. First, decide if you are hearing a systolic murmur, falling between S1 and S2, and coinciding with the carotid upstroke, or a diastolic murmur, falling between S2 and S1. Murmurs are classified according to where they fall in systole and diastole. Systolic murmurs can be early, mid, or late systolic, or even pansystolic. For example, a mid-systolic murmur, as heard in physiologic flow murmurs or aortic stenosis, begins after S1 and stops before S2. Brief gaps are audible between the murmur and the heart sounds. Listen carefully for the gap just before S2. If present, the gap usually confirms the murmur as mid-systolic, not pansystolic. A pansystolic murmur, as heard with mitral regurgitation, starts with S1 and stops at S2 without a gap between murmur and heart sounds. Let's turn our attention next to diastolic murmurs. An early diastolic murmur, as in aortic regurgitation, starts right after S2 without a discernible gap, then usually fades into silence before the next S1. A mid-diastolic murmur, as in mitral stenosis, starts a short time after S2. It may fade away, as heard here. Or it may merge into a late diastolic murmur. A late diastolic murmur, as heard with mitral stenosis, starts late in diastole and typically continues up to S1. The shape of a murmur is determined by its intensity over time. A crescendo murmur grows louder. A decrescendo murmur grows softer. A crescendo-decrescendo murmur, as heard with aortic stenosis, first rises in intensity, then falls. A plateau murmur has the same intensity throughout. The location of maximal intensity is determined by the site where the murmur originates. Find the location by exploring the area where you hear the murmur. Describe where you hear it best in terms of the interspace, and describe the murmur's position relative to the sternum, the apex, or the midsternal, midclavicular, or one of the axillary lines. Radiation, also referred to as transmission from the point of maximal intensity, reflects not only the site of origin, but also the intensity of the murmur and the direction of blood flow. Explore the area around a murmur and determine where else you can hear it. Intensity is usually graded on a 6-point scale and expressed as a ratio. The numerator describes the intensity of the murmur wherever it is loudest, and the denominator by convention, is 6, indicating the scale you are using. Intensity is influenced by the thickness of the chest wall and the presence of intervening tissue. Using the 6-point scale, grade 1 indicates a murmur that is very faint and heard only after the listener has tuned in. It may not be heard in all positions. A grade 2 murmur is quiet, but heard immediately after placing the stethoscope on the chest. A grade 3 murmur is moderately loud. Grades 4, 5, and 6 are increasingly loud and accompanied by a palpable thrill. The pitch of murmurs is categorized as high, medium, or low. The quality of a murmur is described in terms such as harsh, as in aortic stenosis, blowing, as in aortic regurgitation, musical, and rumbling, as in mitral stenosis. You should learn the characteristics of murmurs arising from each of the valvular lesions, and then use these terms when you describe them. For example, a grade 2/6 harsh crescendo-decrescendo mid-systolic ejection murmur, best heard in the second right interspace, suggests aortic stenosis.